And we're live with another episode of State Smash Podcast. Today we are graced with the presence of Daniel Behrman. I believe that's how you pronounce your name, right?
There's a million different pronunciations, but that one works for me.
All right, cool. He's a libertarian presidential candidate, an anarchist who runs the second most successful taxation is theft page on Facebook, and he's got a few ideas about the way that. Oh, I'm sorry. I can hear my voice on your speakers here.
All
Let's
right.
correct that real quick.
Is this any better?
I can still hear it.
Wait.
Oh, no, never mind. It was totally my fault. This is a great way to start this bullshit, because like I had the video playing on another tab because I was gonna start the pop-out chat. If anybody wants to fucking if anybody wants to chat, there's a pop-out chat here, and you can ask him questions. But essentially, yeah, he's a presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party, and he should be announcing his run very shortly to discuss how taxation is theft. It's not my debt. Basically the kinds of stuff that I say all the time, only he's going to be saying it in front of mainstream media cameras. So why don't we start this off actually well now, with what made you an anarchist in the first place?
I think I was just born that way. I was born in California, so pretty much the iron fist of government here, and I think I figured out pretty early on that these rules were not really set in place to help us out and that sort of thing. Probably my first run-in with the government was when I was trying to sell candy bars. I saw some of the other kids in school doing, like fundraisers with official government candy bars. And so I was like, hey, I can buy a box of cheap candy bars at the wholesale place, and I can bring them to school and sell them for $1. And I was making a few bucks, which is, for someone in high school, that's good money. And then I got busted by the school police for some sort of operating without a license. So and then from there I got a driver's license and started fighting tickets that I got from speed traps and that sort of thing. And it was just very clear to me that government wasn't there to help us like they claimed they were. They were really there to just take from us.
Yeah. Well, and on that level, then, so I'm assuming you sympathize very strongly with the little girls and boys starting lemonade stands and then getting shut down because they're not licensed.
Yeah, absolutely. We have this thing in this goes, if you want to get into like the way public school doesn't work, those were really designed as like training for for us to get jobs in factories and that sort of thing. And as much as the greatness of this country was founded on entrepreneurialism, they don't teach any of that in school. And I was actually lucky enough to like stumble into some of these like entrepreneurial seminars and kind of became a seminar junkie for a while after, I don't know, in my 20s, to actually learn some of this stuff. But yeah, it's funny that like that's kind of what the greatness of America was built on. And none of that is taught in public school. It's just follow the rules, graduate, get your diploma, get a job, blah, 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 follow all these steps. And I think that's pretty ridiculous.
Well, and that's it's interesting that you should say that it's built for factory jobs, because the word school comes from the Prussian imported Prussian school system model, and that was designed to get people to be abjectly obedient to the state and its military demands. It was designed to get people to run toward gunfire. And so the idea that they're indoctrinating kids now, that's totally believable.
Yeah, it's there was somebody he was a teacher, and he wrote actually pretty in depth on the subject, and he took it all the way back to I think it was one of the Rockefellers who created the original Federal Department of Education, and how it was literally just for that, because the factories didn't have enough workers, and so basically they use the government to organize and subsidize the training of their employees by saying, "Hey, we're gonna create factory workers for you." And that even goes to how you have the factory is, you have the bell and you go to work, and then the bell and then you go to lunch, and then the bell and it's the same thing they have in school. So it's almost like they're
Right.
training you for that.
Well, and it's also the same thing that they trained with Pavlovian dogs.
Right. Exactly.
Well,
So
and the mice that they trained to get like a specific reward from one button, and that they would keep on pushing the button even when they didn't get the reward. Like a guy at a vending machine keeping on pushing the button when his soda doesn't come out.
oh, absolutely. And that's how they have that sort of reward system with your report cards, and then your punishment with detention, and that stuff is all modeled into the employment world. Of course, a lot of that's starting to change with some of these newer, like more tech companies. They're being a little bit more loose about that, because they've actually figured out that the happier and the more free your employees are, the more productive they are. Which, interestingly enough, if you look at the history of slavery and the different forms of it, you find that of course, like going way back, you have people just beating the slaves for not doing what they're ordered to do until they do what they're being asked. And then now you have this system where all you do is you convince people that they are free and that they're not slaves, and you reward them with something, and then you tax it. And you basically have that same system of slavery where people are basically fueling your entire system. They're providing you this labor for free, but they believe they're being rewarded for it, so they're happier, and they believe that they're free, so they're more productive.
Well, and that's sort of the thing. I like a lot of what Stefan had to say before he got all like fake pragmatic, but essentially one of the things he said is, he had this speech that he gave called "The Story of Your Enslavement."
Yes.
And in that he essentially laid out that the freer people think they are, the more productive they'll be. And in a system where humans are being farmed, that sort of higher production level, just from giving a little more freedom, that's extremely valuable. And it's something that the system would thrive on, to give people just enough freedom that they don't revolt, but but too little freedom to do anything against the system.
Right. Yeah, it's like the free range chickens, or the grass fed beef. You're still stuck on the farm behind the fence, and they just they've got a little room to move around, so they're happier and more productive. They live longer, and of course they get free healthcare.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and gun control, and free speech zones, and religious exceptions for certain duties in society, all these nice little perks. But so my question to you is, first off, what you said that it's not my debt. What do you mean by that?
So I see a lot of people talking about the national debt, and it's something like I think it passed $21 trillion now, and of course, by the time 2020 comes around, it'll probably be closer to 30. Um, and this debt is, everyone's talking about, oh, we got to pay off the debt, or the debt's too high, and it's going to cause inflation, and all these bad things are going to happen because of it. And I'm just like, okay, wait, hang on a second. Let's stop and take a step back. What is this debt, and whose debt is it, right? Because I didn't ask to borrow anything. I didn't receive anything. I didn't sign for it. I didn't spend it. So why should I be asked to pay it back? Um, and I think if we all kind of realize, hey, this debt is just there. It's not ours. It's the U.S. government. Which, if you depending on what brand of thought you subscribe to, either the U.S. government as a corporation, or even for the authoritarians or the statists, or the patriots, the United States government is a public trust, and a public trust is its own legal entity. So a legal entity, any kind of corporation or a trust, if it goes bankrupt, if it has debt, the owners of that corporation or trust, or the trustees or beneficiaries, are not responsible for that debt. And so for us to think that, well, we need to keep paying taxes to pay off this debt is a little bit ridiculous. That's not our debt. And to kind of further make that worse, we have this concept that, oh, well, where's most of this debt coming from? And a lot of it's coming from the Federal Reserve. And so, okay, how does that happen? We're told that the Federal Reserve is part of the government. Of course, I'm sure it's not. But that's kind of what the average American believes. And so we're borrowing from the government. It's almost like borrowing from yourself. How does that work? The United States government owns the printing press. It buys the paper. It pays for the ink. It pays the employees. It owns the printing presses. And it basically does everything to print this money. And somehow that's called borrowing. And that money is owed to the Federal Reserve. And it's done, basically with these treasury bill swaps that they do, which is basically, if you and I were to do something like that, it would be called money laundering. But so basically, we have this system where we're borrowing from nothing for the sole purpose of paying interest to a corporation that never actually lent us anything. So why not just say, hey, look, that's not my debt. We're not going to pay it. And most of this deficit goes away, most of the debt goes away, and the deficit is completely is just gone, because that's, the deficit itself mostly goes to interest on this debt. And so when you do that, you kind of get rid of most of the reason that, the government says we need income tax. Supposedly we need income tax because we have all these things that we need to pay for and keep up with. And if you realize that, hey, most of the deficit is just coming because we have so much borrowed, and that's gone, well, you can really cut the income tax almost to nothing. And
Right.
the government would still be functioning at the same pathetic rate that it's functioning at now.
Right. Well, and that's part of it. Those swaps, they create the debt because they create like currency by swapping basically IOUs from accounts with nothing in them. Like
Right.
Mike Malone's Hidden Secrets of Money series is really revealing. I pimp that everywhere I go. And the reason that that's such a valuable thing to understand is the dollar, as it stands, has, not only, no value, but a negative value to the common person, because they can't collect on that debt. They're not the debtors, and the debtors get to collect on that debt and bring anyone they want into the scam just by encouraging some irresponsible sex and encouraging people to believe that they're a part of the system, because then they have like an unlimited tax farm that they can pull from, all under the guise of paying back this interest on these loans used to create the currency. And so it's really a sick system. And you run the second largest taxation is theft page on Facebook. How many times have you seen comments from people saying taxation isn't theft, it's the price we pay to live in this society?
I see it a lot. And what's really interesting is, I know a lot of people are just like, oh, well, let me insult them, or let me start a fight with them. And I actually really try to engage these people into a civil discussion, as much as I can. Of course, some of them like to just go straight off the troll end and start throwing insults around. But I've really actually learned a lot from these people in understanding how they think, because the way I see it is this: we're stuck on this ball of dirt floating through space with 7 billion people, and a lot of these people already believe that taxes are a necessary part of life, and without them, things are going to descend into chaos.
Right.
And so for us to like just say, oh, well, we're smarter than you, we know that that's not the case, doesn't solve the problem. In order to fix the system, we're outnumbered by all these people who believe in taxation. We need to kind of wake them up in order to have most of the world realize that this is just an imaginary thing that doesn't need to exist. And so I like to engage in these conversations with people, and I've really started finding ways to actually get them to think and wonder and say, yeah, maybe these things aren't entirely necessary, or at least out of all the hundreds of taxes we're paying, we could at least get rid of half of them. And
Well, and if we can't get rid of half of them, then at least that'll show that the people who voted those people in aren't being represented and the state does not represent them.
absolutely. And it's kind of, uh, this country's more or less used to be a free country. A lot of people like to say 1776 was the utopia, which I don't believe it was perfect, but of course, in a lot of ways, it was better back then. But I think we got to the system that we're in now, which is a lot more controlling and a lot more heavily taxed and more socialist. None of this happened overnight. It was all chipped away at. Our freedoms were slowly taken away, our liberties, and all these taxes were slowly added one by one by one. And people got acclimated to that, and as they got acclimated, they were the government was able to basically increase its size and scope because people weren't actively defending against that type of thing. And so
Incrementalism.
exactly, and I think that the only way to fight that is it would be great if we could just flip a switch and things would go back to the way they were. But the reality is that if that happened, we were actually talking about this earlier. If that were to happen, we're kind of in this pressure cooker right now of all these things are kind of set up. Like we have the deficit, we have we have all these ticking time bombs, Social Security, all these other things. If we were to pull the plug on that right now, it wouldn't take much for one or two influential people to say, "Oh, look, we're gonna." Oh, they stopped running these taxes and they stopped all this stuff that we want. Let's make the system collapse, and then we'll blame it on the people who took away the taxes. So now they say, oh, look, we tried it your way. We tried getting rid of taxes, and look at all the chaos that ensued.
Right.
Because that pressure cooker is already there. It's the ticking time bomb is already there. And, all it takes is one person to set that off and blame somebody else.
Well, and to me, I think that it would be pretty terrible to flip a switch and to have all the government services go away, because we need an incremental switch back. We need people to take a step back and personally reevaluate their cultural understandings, and their understandings of self-ownership and a host of other concepts before the state will ever truly collapse. Because otherwise, even if we get anarchy, the state will just resume its normal pace the following week. Somebody's going to establish a state, and that state might even be the most controlling, because it'll come from the freest liberties. So people will consider that state would never go against them, because the smallest states turn into the biggest tyrannies.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all it takes is one person to come along and say, oh, look, there's no government, there's no fire departments, there's no police. This is a state of emergency. I have prepared this constitution and this new government. And yes, it might seem a little bit tyrannical, but it's only because it's an emergency. We'll implement it, and then we'll loosen it up and give you your freedoms back later. And of course, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. So that's just going to become the way things are. And
Right.
it's a great environment for somebody to sell that to the general public. But yeah, exactly to your point, in libertarian and anarchist circles, everyone's always talking about, oh, private police would be better, private roads would be better. And yeah, I believe they would be. But at the same time, if you were to, just turn off the police right now, then there's no police, there's no armed citizens that are trained to defend themselves. There are no private police departments or private security firms that are capable of covering as many people as would need it. So if we were to kind of allow those transitions to happen, then we'd be able to transition into that environment. But yeah, if we just pull the plug, then it's like, okay, now what do we do? And just, things are going to be really rough until those types of things start popping up, which creates an environment for somebody to come in and say, oh, here's the new government that I implement that's just going to solve all your problems.
Right. Well, because we need to decentralize. We need to take like gradual steps in moving toward a less centralized economy, because otherwise the economy will be based on the sort of centralization that has led to this in the first place. And they have tanks, they have nukes, they have things that could destroy us without like anybody hearing it coming, and then destroy first and second responders. I mean, the state has many things at its disposal that we need to gradually strip from them, and it's not going to be an easy thing. But if there was just a button you could push, that would be a very bad thing. That would be a good way to get government to seem real necessary when all the people who currently rely on it revolted against that concept. So it's good. It's good to remember that there do need to be steps taken, and it's not going to happen overnight. However, I am an anarchist, sort of, I guess, like I could flash a douchebaggy purist card here, and I could say that I don't see voting as a valuable way to do that, especially since Hillary Clinton got the popular vote over the last election, and she isn't the president for some reason. And I think the reason that is because essentially the system is very much rigged in favor of whoever the elites want to be running the reality show next week. And I think that it's very scripted. So take somebody cynical like me and try and like imagine that the entire nation was that kind of cynic, and can give us like a speech that you would think would convince them of voting as a means of change.
All right, I got one for you. So yeah, I agree with you completely. The system is rigged on a ton of different levels. But think about this: it's rigged, but it's a little bit ambiguous. There's still a lot of people out there who believe this system is real. But what would happen if you pulled back the curtains on this system and showed, okay, because you could say arguably, oh, okay, yeah, Hillary, maybe it was a few thousand votes, it was really close in the Electoral College. If it was like 90% Hillary, then she would have gotten it. You can say all these things. You can kind of justify that, oh, maybe it's not that rigged. But what if somebody went out there as a third party option, who is not a Republican and not a Democrat, and literally every single person that everybody knew went out there and voted for a third person just to test the system, just to say, if nobody votes for this Democrat or this Republican, and every single person in the country votes for this other person, is the system still going to say, well, something funky happened in our Electoral College and the Democrat is going to get it? And if that were to happen, that would totally pull back the curtains, and that would say, even to the people who are they believe that government is the greatest thing and it helps all these people and it does all these great things, that even says to that person, whoa, holy shit, this system really is rigged. To all the people who don't believe that there's no election fraud, or it's so small that it doesn't count, or there's no electronic voter fraud, or any of these things, to that person, they can't deny it at that point, because 90, 95, 100% of everybody that voted for a third-party candidate, and that third-party candidate didn't win. What happened?
Well, okay, so on that level, what would be your promises once you got in, and how would you service the people that are already dependent on the state if you did get in? Because many people accuse Donald Trump of having gone in on an entertainment basis and on a populist basis, but then they accuse him of being completely daft and bereft of any sort of understanding of how the geopolitical system works and how to effectively, quote, run the country, implying that the deep state doesn't, of course, which kind of goes counter to a lot of the
Right.
supporters' message. But, aside from that, how would you operate if you were in the White House?
So the first thing that I want to do is I want to shut down some of these completely wasteful government programs that are completely detrimental to the livelihood of Americans. And I'm talking about like the war on drugs, the Federal Department of Education, which would basically return that power back to the states and to local communities overnight. These things you could flip the switch on without having a total disaster. I'd start cutting the IRS to where, hey, there's no more of this malicious collection practices that they do. The civil asset forfeiture programs, all these other programs that you could just cut overnight. That would be the first thing to go. Then we have the issue of the taxes, the income tax, the debt. Let's get that out of the way. Let's get it off the table. Let's close up the debt. Let's go to the Federal Reserve and say, hey, you guys started from nothing. You gave us nothing. You provided no value to us. And there was actually I think it was I can't remember if it was a federal case or not, but there was a case back in the 1900s where somebody actually tried this. They went to a bank was trying to foreclose on their house, and the bank said, you haven't paid your bills, give us your house. And the guy said to the bank, well, you didn't give me any money. Because you know how when the bank lends money, they basically take it out of someone else's account and put it in someone else's account. And the bank is actually not short any money because of that transaction. Now, of course, this was overturned because the bank did lend someone else's money. But in the case of the Federal Reserve, they didn't lend anybody else's money. They created it. So based on that philosophy, a lot of this debt goes away. We solve a lot of our problems. We start cutting taxes across the board. And that starts helping, that helps boost the economy. That puts more money in people's pockets, all that sort of thing. Then we're going to start cutting the entire healthcare industry, cutting all the regulations that are making that industry so difficult. The lack of competition alone is what makes, you go into the hospital and, they charge you $700 for a bag of saline. And they charge you $10,000 a night or $100,000 a night, depending on where you go. All these things are because of the lack of competition. I've known people who were certified doctors in India or some other countries where it's not like they have less training in these countries. They're doctors, and they come here to the U.S., but they can't practice because they didn't go to an American school, an accredited American school. And so you solve that problem. Now you have more doctors, you have more competition. The prices of healthcare starts coming down. And I think this is, if you look at a lot of libertarians who kind of try and say, oh, we're going to get the government out of healthcare, people get a little bit scared because they're like, well, what's going to happen to my healthcare? The quality is going to go down and all these evil corporations are going to rip me off. Instead of saying, no, let's focus on the positives of this. If we do this, if we get the government out of this, you're not going to need government mandated healthcare or free healthcare from the government because the prices are going to come down so low and the quality is going to go up so high that you're going to be able to get great healthcare on your minimum wage job. And I think if a lot of people start to see this, then that's when it's going to kind of click with the mainstream that, hey, maybe this isn't such a bad idea.
Okay, well, okay, so multiple responses to multiple things. So the first thing is the way the dollar is printed essentially creates the necessity for a deflationary collapse post default on all the US government's loans. And realistically speaking, that's not going to make the nations that are unhappy with the US government already any happier, and it's not going to make the U.S. government allies any happier because basically they're only allies to be part of the debt scam hegemony. So how do you prevent a deflationary collapse from turning into the U.S. being taken over and world war happening pretty much everywhere when chaos and pandemonium strike, because the world reserve currency is no longer the thing that it was based on, and it happened very suddenly. If you end the Federal Reserve, how do you stop that default, and how do you stop the deflationary collapse? And if you don't plan on stopping either, how do you prevent that from turning into a giant international catastrophe?
Right. Okay, so there's a few interesting points you brought up there. One, the U.S. dollar being the reserve currency, and if you were to pull the plug on that, the catastrophes that would happen. When I say I want to pull the plug on the Federal Reserve, I don't want to pull the plug on the dollar. What I want to do is say, okay, look, the U.S. government is already basically printing money, which I don't like printing money, but if they're taking, because a lot of what they do is they take, the old bills out, they destroy them and they print new ones, which they probably don't need to do as often even. But then there's the printing of, oh, let's just make some new money. Of course, most of the U.S. dollars that are in circulation are all electronic, so those aren't even really technically printed. But that's all already done by the government. That doesn't need the Federal Reserve to happen. The Federal Reserve isn't actually backing this with anything. It's not gold-backed currency. Now, what we could do is we could say, okay, for the amount of gold that the U.S. has, supposedly, all the gold of what's left in Fort Knox, that's now backing the U.S. dollar. What we do is we can remove all the regulations that are preventing all these alternative currencies from competing. So, it's been really difficult for Bitcoin and all these cryptocurrencies to compete. But also there have been a lot of people who have tried to make gold and silver backed currencies in the US. And the only reason they failed is because government came in and said no. So there are plenty of ways that we can actually get competing currencies going. And as competing currencies go, we could actually have, we were talking earlier about transitioning into better systems. We could actually allow people to transition off of the dollar into these other currencies. So it wouldn't be like we're pulling the plug on the dollar itself and making things collapse, but we're creating a transitional period where people are free to use other currencies and transition off of the dollar.
Okay, well, on Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, currently the value seems tied to the dollar, where everybody is concerned with, how much Federal Reserve currency is my Bitcoin worth, and that's what the charts seem to be going off of. So, how will Bitcoin maintain its value curves in society transitioning away from what previously established those curves?
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, you go to a job and you get paid in US dollars, and then you go pay your rent in US dollars, and then you go buy your groceries in US dollars. There aren't very many ways that if you were to do some privately contracted service with somebody for Bitcoin, that you could take that Bitcoin and pay your rent or buy your groceries or go get a haircut, all these other things. And part of that has to do with all those regulations. For example, a lot of companies don't accept Bitcoin because there aren't a lot of ways to easily accept it. When you go to a restaurant, these restaurants basically buy a POS system, a point of sale system, from some third-party provider. This third-party provider, they make all the hardware and the software, and they distribute it to thousands of restaurants. If one of those companies were to say, hey, we're going to include Bitcoin in these systems, then you'd instantly, overnight, have thousands of restaurants and hotels and other businesses that are accepting Bitcoin. The problem is that because of all the regulations and the uncertainty of what Bitcoin is and what it's valued at, that makes it extremely difficult. But if you get a lot of those roadblocks out of the way, then you can actually start that transition happening. And once a currency is able to be a currency on its own, and you can spend it and you can earn it, without having to go through all these hoops and convert it to other currencies first, then that's where it really starts to get its value.
So on that level, one of the reasons that it seems to be less than understood, Bitcoin, that is, seems to be less than understood, is because speculators keep on shocking the market value by transitioning from Bitcoin to Federal Reserve note and back again in rapid succession, trying to follow trends and use it as a way to gamble. Is there any point at which you think, like, what's your projected timeline on this sort of thing creating the better and more desirable market, where Bitcoin would not be used as a speculation, but as the primary modus of currency?
I I think we're actually pretty close to that. And getting all the regulations out of the way and having people confident that they're going to be gone um, is going to be a big factor. And I think once that happens, and people are confident that government's not going to change its mind and shut you down, people are going to start investing in these systems, and it's only going to take a couple of years before we really start getting into it. And you talk about speculation, but if you look at, you look at everything. Everything is speculation. If you look at the value of uh, you know international currencies, which are widely accepted in other countries, you still have that same thing. People are buying and selling all day. There are people who are in forex markets who are speculating. Oh, I think the Mexican peso or the Japanese yen is going to go up, so I'm going to buy some of it. And you still have the whales in those markets. Granted, those are much bigger markets, so you need bigger whales that are purchasing a lot of it, and they're forcing the prices up and down. Now, with Bitcoin, what's interesting is that there's a lot of people who don't have a lot of faith in Bitcoin itself, but they prefer other cryptocurrencies. It's possible that Bitcoin might be dead in a few years, but the cryptocurrency technology, I think, is going to be around forever. And there are other currencies coming up that are faster. Their transaction fees aren't so high. All these other benefits. Those are coming around, and those are kind of creating their own value. And you've got so many. Nobody really thinks about these as currencies, but you've got so many currencies out there that are like, your airline miles, all these different points that you can earn by shopping at different stores. These things they're really kind of microcurrencies that only work. Of course, they have the same limitations where you can only earn them and spend them in one smaller economy. But sorry. But yeah, I think it's going to be. It's not going to take too long for this sort of thing to happen. It really just it needs the freedom to be able to do what it's going to do, and people are just going to naturally go to hey, I like this currency. Like for me, the airline points, I've never understood those, but some people love them. They collect them like crazy, or they use their credit cards, and they love spending money to get extra points that they can use for getting a free hotel or whatever.
And they don't consider the costs of that, because basically you're agreeing to interest, extreme
Exactly.
bank fees, and a shit ton of other things that like would make it seem like a really bad idea if you fucking read the contract. But go
Exactly.
ahead.
But people they love doing that because it's almost like a video game to them. Like the points are like video game points. And if you think about it, that's exactly what the dollar is. Because as the dollar is just a piece of worthless paper with a number printed on it. They could have printed an extra zero and it would be no more valuable, except for the perceived value that you could give it to someone and they'll say, oh, that's got an extra zero on it.
Right. Well, and of course, that's, I think, part of the key there is that value is perceived. It's subjective. There's no like ledger anywhere specific that says this is how much things are. So I mean, I think that's a valuable thing to remember, is that
Right.
people will go where they want to go regardless of what some arbitrary authority says.
And actually, directly to that point, so you say like people can, they compare everything to the dollar. They compare the value of Bitcoin or Ethereum. Well, they also do that with foreign currencies, the peso, the yen. They do it with all these currencies. But what do you compare the dollar to? And if all you're comparing the dollar to is itself, of course the price never changes. But if you
Right.
compare the dollar to the value of gold or the price of gas or the price of a car or the price of a meal, then it becomes a little bit more clear that, hey, maybe this one's not that stable either.
Well, and of course, if you look at the fact that the dollar can be printed literally as much as a central authority wants, whereas most cryptocurrencies, at least the popular ones, not the shit coins, they have a fixed supply.
Right.
So you can't market shock that way. It prevents that sort of like inflationary market shock that you would get from something like, a gold or a silver or a Federal Reserve note, where you could just mine and find more of a metal, or you could print more of an arbitrary currency with no backing
Right.
behind it.
All you need is like some crazy guy like Mugabe to come in and you've got $50 trillion bills floating around everywhere, and that's the cost of a beer is like now $20 trillion. Well, how did that happen?
Well, Wehrmacht.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, any economy that has the potential for wheelbarrows of cash is doomed to fail.
Absolutely.
So, and so to get slightly off the economic tack, because I'm going to go back there in the future with you at some point. I hope to have you on again to discuss this stuff in more detail. But in terms of ending the drug war, what would be your first move on that?
So the first move would actually be, there would be two moves that I'd do at the exact same time. And one of them, I have to give fair credit where it's due. I think it was Austin Peterson who came up with it, which is executive order to reschedule marijuana and a few other drugs down to, I guess it's Schedule 3 or Schedule 4, which basically means the DEA can't prosecute them.
What are the other drugs?
I'd say probably cocaine, LSD, possibly heroin, as long as it doesn't totally upset people about it. Because ultimately, those it's not because a lot of what everybody thinks is like, oh, you want people to run around doing heroin. No, it's because this is a medical problem, not a criminal problem.
Well, and Rand Paul mocked people for that, and he said, I'm not a libertarian. I don't want people to run around naked smoking weed. So I'm guessing that you are a libertarian, unlike Rand Paul or Ron Paul's knockoff.
Right. And so I actually had this conversation when I had this conversation with the sheriff when I was stopped through like I was stopped on this road that's like I guess it's a popular drug trafficking road from Mexico through Texas. And so, he was trying to search my car and he saw all my stickers and everything. And so he actually started asking me questions, what I think about the drug war. And we started talking about meth addicts. And he said, well, I just arrested this meth addict who was breaking into a house, and he was about to run off with the TV. And, he was doing this because he needed money for more meth. So I said, okay, so was he high at the time? And he was like, yeah. I was like, okay, so what did you arrest him and charge him for? Well, for breaking and entering. So does it matter that he was high at the time? Because he still got charged with breaking and entering. Well, it was his third offense because he was high on meth. Okay, so it was his third offense, so he's probably going to get a bigger sentence. So you're still going to get him in jail, right? Yeah. So if he were sitting at home doing meth by himself and not running out stealing TVs, would you have any real reason to arrest him? Because you just told me that the reason you didn't like this guy is because he breaks into houses and steals TVs. But if he's at home doing it by himself and not doing all these other illegal things, what reason do you have to hate him? And so that's kind of the argument with, everybody presumes, oh, if meth becomes legal, people are going to be running around in the streets naked doing meth. But they're not doing that now.
Well, and I always ask people, if meth was legal, would you fucking smoke it? And most people say no.
Exactly. So,
I've never smoked meth. I've smoked other things, but I've never smoked fucking meth, and don't plan to, no matter what its legal state is.
Exactly. And you have this other, there's so many situations. Like, let's say you've got a child and your child's like, they just turned 18. So now they're an adult and they can be tried as an adult. And you find out they're addicted to heroin, but you don't want to call the police or take them to a hospital or try to get them in a rehab program because you're worried they're going to go to jail and they're going to take your baby away for the rest of, however many years.
Right.
But if it's legal, you can make that happen. If you find out that your kid's stealing something to get meth money, send him to the police and let him be charged with, petty crime and all this other stuff. But you're not going to send him away for 40 years because he's in possession of some drug.
Well, I have somebody in comments making a very oft-repeated point. He's also a regular on this podcast and on all my broadcasts. His name is Finian Cornelison. He's also available on Google+. He's saying, decriminalize, legalization equals control, like current alcohol laws. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, taxation is theft. That's like that's my motto for everything. So I don't really want to tax anything, but at the same time, if that's the way we get it through, then that's the way we get it through. If that's because it's a hard pill for America to swallow. But when you start looking at states like Colorado and California that are legalizing recreational marijuana, and then everybody says, oh, well, I guess it wasn't so bad. Well, first you get them to legalize it and say, oh, we're going to get all this money, so I guess it's worth it. And then you get to the say, okay, well, look, it's not so bad. You don't have all these drug addicts running around. Now you can take the tax part away. So it's kind of one of those things where if we can be incremental about it and it works, then let's do it. But asking a lot of people to agree with just saying, oh, let's just make it all, everything go and just take the football straight to the goal. A lot of people aren't going to be comfortable with that, and that's going to stop you from moving it anywhere.
So basically, it's populism.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's in order to make that happen, unfortunately, the way it is, you need that populism behind it, or else it's just not going to happen.
So on that level, what other compromises are you willing to make?
So that's an interesting choice of words. I wouldn't necessarily call it a compromise. I would say we're still pushing the ball down the field. It's like if and I'm not a big football person, but I'll use the football analogy. You're at the 50-yard line. You're going to take the ball 5 yards. Is that a compromise because you couldn't take it 30? Is that really a compromise? Or are you still moving things in the right direction?
Well, how far can you move it?
As far as you possibly can. And just like I said earlier, we got to the way that we are now. We used to be a lot freer in terms of, even free speech and gun rights and economic liberties. We used to be so much freer. We didn't get this way because one guy came in and said, I'm going to pass this new bill. We got this way because a bunch of guys came in and said, I'm just going to take away one little freedom. And then the next guy came in and said, I'm just going to take away one little freedom. And they kept chipping away and chipping away. And the only way we're going to get back is by doing the same thing in reverse.
Okay, well, Finian is coming back with, so my rights are limited by other people's beliefs and fears. Yay.
Unfortunately, and so if you look at the government as a republic or a limited republic, which is to say it's an organization that's allowed to do whatever its creators, its creators could not delegate rights that it doesn't have. So if one of the creators of the government doesn't have the right to trample your rights, then the government doesn't have the right to do it. That would be wonderful. Unfortunately, we compare democracy to gang rape all the time and say, well, we all voted on it. You lost. Sorry, this is what's going to happen. The reality is, if you're in a scenario and you're outnumbered by people who want to use violence against you, they're going to use violence against you. And if you don't have the power of force to stop them, what can you do? You can either try to fight them and die trying, which some people would prefer to do, or you can try talking to them and getting them into a state of mind where, hey, maybe we can reason this out, and you get them to calm down a little bit. And then once they calm down a little bit, you get them to say, okay, maybe we're overreacting. And then maybe you get to a point where you can actually walk away from the scenario. And I've dealt with fights like this before where, a fight breaks out in the bar. Somebody's outnumbered. Somebody's about to get their ass kicked by like 3 or 4 people. And somebody steps in and says, hey, wait, calm down, guys. We don't need to fight, right? Is that saying, okay, well, we had to convince the number of people who are outnumbering the person who's about to get their ass kicked. So does that mean that populism takes away this other person's right who's about to get their ass kicked? Well, no. He still has a right to his life and liberty, but he was about to have his life and liberty trampled by people who are going to use violence. And so if you can defuse that bomb instead of just letting it go off, things turn out a little bit better.
All right. Well, one last question from Finian, because we're about to wrap it up, and I wanted to talk about something that people can invest in through your taxation is theft page. One question from Finian is, well, statement. We've been trying that strategy for many years, and it's led us to where we are, on the verge of a hot revolution if they come for military-style weapons. What do you have to say about that?
I have to say, you know what? At least we're trying as hard as we can, because from the people who say that kind of thing, usually the alternate solution is to say things like, I'm just not going to participate. I'm just going to pretend government doesn't exist. I'm not going to vote. I'm not going to, I'm not going to consent to anything that they're doing. But when you do that, you still end up in the same place, because at the end of the day, even though you have all your rights, you walk outside your front door and there's 200 and however many million people in the US who are going to say, that guy's crazy. He thinks he has rights. And what are you going to do? Like, are you going to go out and kill 200 million Americans because you think that, or because those 200 million people are willing to violate your rights? You're outnumbered. What are you going to do? So yeah, we're in a shitty situation, but it's what can we do? What are our options? And I'm not saying my solutions are going to change everything, but it's one of those things where when you have a problem and you have more and more people fighting that problem, the more people that are fighting that problem, the more chance you have on actually solving that problem eventually.
Agreed. Okay, so to lighten the mood, because I ask pretty difficult questions on my show, as I'm sure you're aware now. Essentially, I saw this product, and I think that that if a decent chunk of people bought it, that could be some street level difference on its own. And it's sold through your Taxation is Theft page on Facebook, which I've linked people to on my Facebook post about this. That basically they're these little cards that you can take to restaurants in different places and say that this is not a tip, this is a gift, and taxation is theft. And you can just distribute these with your what would have been tip in the olden days before we were as woke as we all are. So I just wanted you to discuss that and discuss maybe some of the success stories.
Absolutely. So there's actually a few things we've got on there, but that one's really popular, and it's we weren't the original one to come up with that idea. There's a lot of people who have something similar, but the idea is a lot of people say starve the beast, stop paying all the taxes, and of course that's not going to happen, because whatever they can't get from us, they'll just print to make up for it. But it at least gets people to start thinking, like, why are we giving all this money to government? What are we getting in return for it? And so I've actually been taking those cards, and I've been every restaurant I go to. Not only do I tip in cash and give them that card, which it has information on it. It has a link to the website taxationistheft.info, which is that kind of takes them down the rabbit hole on like everything about taxation. And you give it to them, and then I take pictures of the card with the cash on the table, and I leave my review on like Google Maps or Yelp with that picture. So not only are the wait staff receiving it, but you've got people who are now going through the reviews and comments on all these restaurants, and they're saying, hey, what is that? And I've actually started getting emails from Google saying, hey, your review on Google Maps is really popular. People like this photo, which is pretty funny because it's just a picture of that business card or one of the taxation theft stamps. So it's really helping in getting the word out there. And that's kind of what this whole website is about. The taxationistheft.cards is more like an online gift shop, with taxation is theft shirts and hats, and I wear these around everywhere. And people just, it works in so many different ways. Some people come up to me and say, "Hey, you know what? I never thought about it, but that's true." And it starts people like down the rabbit hole. It gets them to start thinking, and they go home and they're like, "What taxation? Why do we have to pay so much in taxes?" And then I was the other day. I was at a really crowded museum in New York, and so everyone's standing around taking pictures, and I just kind of make sure my shirt's pointing in whichever direction the camera is, so that people go back and they look at their photos and they're like, "What's that? What's that obnoxious shirt sticking out in the back? Oh, it says taxation is theft." And some people hate it at first, but I know some people who are they've got the advanced liberal disease out here in California, and I say it to them enough times, not just saying taxation is theft, but I bring it up in conversation, and eventually even the most resistant people to that idea are starting to like get it. And it's the same thing that the government uses with all of its propaganda campaigns against us. Repetition. The more you repeat something, the more people start to like think about it. And when you have something that's a fact that can't be disputed, then it's really hard for them to get it out of their head.
Right. Well, and like on that level, that's my war. That's the way I fight. I try to get the culture out there, and I try to fight them on an intellectual and ideological front. So I do thank you for showing up, because I think it's valuable to get all the perspectives out there. Because maybe I'm wrong, and voting is effective, and all we need is enough people on board your sort of vessel there. Now, my question is, as a last sort of humorous question, what makes you a better choice than Adam Kokesh?
I talked to Adam and I said, "Look, I'm going to be running against you, but let's make this a clean fight." But at the same time, I really have nothing against Adam. I know there's like some rumors going around about all kinds of stuff I won't even talk about because I wasn't there. And to me, it's just what I heard through the grapevine. So these are things that I don't even want to talk about. I think he's got some really great ideas. Some of his ideas I think are not planned out so well. But at the same time, he does have a lot of really great ideas. And I was at the Libertarian Texas Convention, and I was watching, and we had 3 really great candidates up there for governor. And I was sitting there thinking, like, these are 3 really great people who really understand the issues. Why do we only have to pick one? So actually, if I were to somehow make my way into the White House, I would actually love to have Adam come with me and bring his ideas there, because we need more people like that. I don't want to be surrounded by a bunch of government creeps that are going to be sitting there saying, as much as you think your ideas are great, we need to drop a bomb on Korea. I don't need those, like they say, I don't need that kind of negativity around me. And
Right.
It would be good to have some really great people who do have good ideas that actually are there and want to help people. And I think Adam's done a really great job at waking a lot of people up. And I think he would actually, be a good bit of help in there.
Very cool. All right. Well, this has been an episode of the State Smash podcast. You can find Daniel Behrman on his Facebook page, which I've linked in my Facebook post. And you can also find him with his Taxation is Theft page. And I'm assuming that you'll be making your official announcement shortly. So if you do, link me that in messages, and I'll send it out to the people who are interested. Daniel, it was good to have you on.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, man. Can't wait till next time.
All right. Thank you.
Catch you later.
Be well.
You too.